It's Binjang 91.5, and you're listening to Tony Graham. And it's time now for me to talk with our Mayor of Dubbo Regional Council, and that's Matthew Dickerson, because they've had a round of committee meetings, and we're here to discuss the outcomes of those meetings. And we're in Studio 2 with Matthew now. How are you going, Matthew?
Good, thank you, Tony. Good to be chatting, and thank you for giving me your time to talk to your listeners.
Well, I was just hoping that I could get to you today before your teeth fell out. I was a little bit worried about that with the fluoridation situation.
It is a problem, isn't it? It's very disappointing, and I have said a number of times, I do apologise to the community for that situation. Again, it started 3.5 years ago, obviously well before our time, and we're going to resolve this problem, but it's very disappointing. There's no doubt about it. You rely on council to be able to get some of the basics right, and being able to treat water to the correct standard is a fairly basic thing that a council should be able to do.
Yes, anyway, that was just a bit of a joke there more than anything, but I can understand the Dubbo people wouldn't be seeing it as much of a joke.
No.
And of course, I should stipulate that Wellington's not affected by the fluoridation problem.
Correct, that's right. It was only the Dubbo water treatment plant. And
yeah.
Don't worry, we have had some people say to us, can you make sure that the other treatment plants are producing water at the correct quality and or according to the correct specifications? So we have gone through and had a look at the other treatment plants. And you actually do have some that don't have fluoride in them, but that's okay if it's communicated with the community to say there isn't fluoride being put in this particular water. The problem with Dubbo was the community being told many years ago fluoride was being put in, and if you stop putting it in, it's a breach of the Act of the Fluoridation of Public Water Supply Act 1957. So council was in breach of that act.
Okay, the dental trade must be doing very well out of those people. Any case, now last night there was some interesting committee outcomes, I guess. To start with, what was the changes or what was agreed to and out of the aquatics, what they call, with the swimming pools, for God's sake? Let's call it the swimming pool working party, because that's what it is. It's
a swimming pool, that's right. Well, 3 swimming pools actually, the aquatic working party, and essentially you're right, you've got the 3 swimming pools there, Wellington, Geary and Dubbo, and really that was the reformation. So remember the committees we've talked about and getting community feedback again? Obviously that was something that we said was very important. A lot of these committees that had existed before in the old Dubbo City Council had been disbanded for some reason. I don't actually know why, Tony, but a lot of those committees, I think 16 committees, we've now reformed or formed some new ones out of those to get feedback from the community. The Aquatic Working Party was one of those committees, so they held their first meeting, and essentially it was really getting the bearings, working out what the process was for those committee members. Some of those committee members had never been on a committee like that before, so it was really just getting their bearings. And the only real decision out of that was just the proposal for the calendar for the next season. Now, just keep in mind there's a 3-step process with these consultative committees, and I actually really like that. It gives people a great opportunity. So what happens is the Aquatic Centre Working Party meeting would happen. You would have the committee members of that. You've got community members from that. You've got some councillors, some staff, and they discuss whatever things they want to discuss about the aquatic centres in detail. And you've got people who are very involved in the swimming industry, so they've got very good expertise or knowledge specific to that. And once the Aquatic Centre Working Party makes some recommendations, it's not a decision of council, it's just a recommendation. That recommendation will then go through to our standing committee meetings, which occurred last night, and they might be considered further. There might be some changes there. Other councils might weigh in with some different ideas. And then that's not a decision of council. That then is a recommendation to the council meeting. And in 2 weeks' time, we'll have our council meeting, and that committee meeting recommendation will go to there. Again, it's got another chance to be changed or modified or adopted as is, and only at that point does it become a resolution of council or a decision of council. The good thing about that is it gives you a couple of bites at the cherry. It gives you a couple of chances to consider a decision. You've essentially flagged to the community where it's likely to go, but it can change by that final council meeting. So I really like that process, and it's a much more robust process to really make sure the community's on board and understanding what decisions are being made.
Okay, we've talked about process then. The next big thing is, okay, what are the standout changes that are being made?
In terms of the Aquatic Centre Working Party?
Yeah, no. In terms of the swimming pool there was, I know that there has been a situation where you've been looking at privatising, going back to a privatised model of the swimming pools, for example.
Yes.
Is that still working through? Has a report come through on that yet?
So we've had a discussion about that. The big issue with that, Tony, is really all about timing. So this council only got back in January this year. We've gone through, we've had a look at the various figures, the data there. It seemed to be fairly obvious at a first glance that it was certainly run more cost effectively when it was outsourced rather than run internally by staff. And so it didn't seem like there was any business case or any logical reason to bring it internal. It's been internal now for a couple of years. So we have had a look at that, analysed that data, looked at those figures, and that mainly applied to the Dubbo Centre rather than the Geary or Wellington centres. But again, the same model would have been applied. What we've had to do with there is just from a timing perspective, there simply wasn't enough time to go back out to an external process because you've got to go out through a tender process. You've got staff internally that you've got to work out whether you can redeploy them somewhere else in the organisation or whether you've got to give them redundancies. So there's a whole range of processes there. So essentially the decision of council in that workshop discussion was really we need to leave it as is for this coming year, this calendar year, do some more analysis of that, look at some of these figures now that things have been bedded in to a certain extent. And if we're going to do something, we need to make some changes at the very end of the season next year, so around that March, April timeframe, so that if you do go out to external tenders, you've got time to do that and get those in before the next season starts. So for this season, we will still run it internally, but we haven't stopped looking at it. And it's something that you do on a regular basis anyway. Look at your business operations and see if you can do them better.
Okay. Now, a big controversy in Dubbo at the moment is the Macquarie River Master Plan. That's what they're calling it. It's to do with Regan Park. It's a precinct of land that follows the river. That's going to be looked at for development of parkland. So obviously, that's a big plan. A lot of money, I would expect, would be involved in that. And here in Wellington, of course, we have a fairly controversial situation with council. Well, it's not so overtly controversial, but certainly amongst the population of Wellington, they're very, very disappointed about what's happened to Cameron Park in recent years, about its degradation from what it was as a horticultural venue and the amenity of the park itself, things like the facilities in it, and the design and a whole range of things as well, centred around the Tourism Information Centre and the empty building, etc., etc., etc. And that hasn't been addressed, and it continues to be a problem. We don't have tourists stopping here very much anymore as a result of that along the main street. So it's interesting that the council's looking at Regan Park. So what sort of program is this? How much is it going to cost? When are they going to do it? All these questions come up, Matthew.
Yeah, you're right. And the Regan Park one, I agree with you. It's disappointing that so much money is having to be spent on Regan Park to fix up some issues from the past. And maybe we need to be looking at Cameron Park at some stage. We've allocated $140,000 for this master planning process, which isn't just Regan Park. That's what's called the South Precinct and the North Precinct. So essentially in Dubbo, the LH Ford Bridge, the main bridge across the river, south of that, the river corridor along there, and the Erskine Street Bridge or the Jean-Amel Sarisia Bridge north of that. So those two precincts there in terms of the river corridor, the master planning process. And the really disappointing part about that is that there was a lot of money spent, Tony, back in the old Dubbo City Council days for a Regan Park master plan. And that came to fruition around about 2013, and I thought it was a fantastic plan. There was a whole range of different components of that plan. There was a velodrome on there, a criterium track, there were habitat areas, various restoration of habitat areas. So there was a mixture of a whole range of things for people to do, passive and active recreation, some ecological areas. So I thought that plan was great. For whatever reason, and I don't want to dwell on the past, but in June 2018, that plan was completely rescinded, so there was no plan there for Regan Park. And then in February last year, a proposal was put forward to potentially allocate 10 hectares of Regan Park to a football club to build some sporting fields on. And that then sat there for 10 months doing something, not much, I'm not sure exactly what, but this council saw that we really needed to do something about that and fix it up. So we've gone back to that master planning process, unfortunately having to spend money on doing something that had been done many years ago again. So that's where we're at the moment. sometimes some people are talking about some hidden agendas or secret agendas, but there must be some pretty clever councillors on council at the moment, because the whole thing was put through last year with a whole different group of councillors. These councillors must have been pulling some magic levers somewhere to make all that happen. So I'm being a bit facetious, Tony, because there is no secret hidden agenda. There's a master planning process, and that we're inviting the community to put feedback into that, and hopefully we'll get that feedback, we'll come up with the master plan, and then we'll have finally, won't be till next year, that whole plan for that area. Maybe that's the time then that we need to go and look more at Cameron Park. And after we've finished that master planning process here, you've got the pedestrian bridge, which will be open shortly in Wellington, that connects Pioneer Park across to Cameron Park. We've got an application in for some charges, some EV charges at the library to try and bring some people back into there. I think there's potential there to do a few things with Cameron Park there, but maybe that's a process we need to look at, and maybe look at a master planning process again for the whole Cameron Park and even the Pioneer Park area. Again, it's probably frustrating for Wellington residents to see all this money being spent in Dubbo fixing up something that was already done and dusted, but unfortunately we do find that we're doing a little bit of that. We're having to fix up some errors from the past.
Yeah, obviously council is still looking at the Main Street plan that they had for parking and other things in relation to that. How's that going?
Yeah, that's still going, and I can't tell you exactly where that's up to. I know there's a process that's occurring as we speak in terms of that or looking at again that whole parking process. There was a survey done, I think we've talked about it before, where it was done and there was information that had been fed in from various businesses in Wellington, and it seemed like a good process, and then suddenly it all stopped and then changes were made without really considering all that public consultation. So we're going back and looking at that again, looking at what was there before and actually going through and getting more information from people along there to try and get that whole parking fixed up along there. And then maybe as the next stage of that, looking at Cameron Park. There's no decision of council, so I'm talking off the top of my head a little bit there, Tony. There is no resolution of council to go and look at that area and a master plan for that area. I suppose my point is that once we get the Dubbo side sorted out, maybe we should be looking at Cameron Park. Maybe we can do it simultaneously. It does come down to a certain extent in terms of the availability of our staff and also the costing that we've got, the amount of funds we've got available.
Yeah, well, a lot of people consider that situation with the parking and whatnot. That's all part and parcel of the dynamic of the Cameron Park precinct. And of course, the other question is has there been any progress yet in relation to that parcel of land that was part of, well, still is supposedly an able use for cricket near Soldiers Lane here in Wellington?
So you're not talking about Market Square?
Oh, sorry, Market Square is what I'm talking about, yes.
Yeah, right, okay, so that's fine. So Market Square, there's a number of parcels of land that we're looking at across Dubbo and Wellington as to whether or not they should be kept for either passive recreation or left as open fields, open space, or whether in fact they should be changed in their use, maybe used for residential development or used for some other type of development. And that's a big process to do that. In fact, we sat with a Regional Cities New South Wales meeting yesterday, and we had a gentleman from Crown Lands to come and talk to all the regional cities sitting around the table about that process and how that process occurs and the upsides and the downsides. The important part about that process, Tony, is really we've gone out to the community and said, here are some parcels of land, again in Dubbo and Wellington, and Market Square is one of them in Wellington. Here's some parcels of land that we're looking at that we are considering as potentially somewhere that we could convert over from Crown Land to be used potentially for other types of development. And we're really just asking for some feedback from the community at this stage. That's out for consultation. So there's a number of steps to go before that would happen. But step one, if you like, is really just to get a bit of a sentiment, a bit of a feel from the community, whether or not they'd be open to those ideas or whether or not they don't think that would be appropriate for those communities. So please, if you've got an opinion about Market Square, whether you think it should be used as it is now, used for other recreational purposes, whether it could be developed into some sort of development, whether it be residential or industrial, whatever development you think might be appropriate there, send that information into council, let us know, and then based on that feedback for a few of these different parcels, then we'll either say, well, that's the end of it there, leave it as it is, or we'll develop it further. And again, there'll be more consultation to come. And again, having talked to Crown Lands yesterday at that meeting I mentioned, there's certainly a number of steps in that process because it's not something the government does lightly, taking Crown Land and converting it to other uses.
Yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Matthew, from the special community or committee meeting, should I say?
No, I think that covers it fairly well, Tony. There were lots of minor technical things that were taken care of last night, and that often happens at committee meetings, and then those go forward through to the council meeting in 2 weeks' time. But really, it's just a good opportunity to talk about council things and keep encouraging the community, your community, to engage with council, to give feedback to council if they see things. And not every problem can be solved. I obviously get lots of feedback at the moment about roads, and that is a major issue, and I can't solve all those problems. Roads are certainly in a state of disrepair at the moment, and fixing those roads is a long-term strategic decision. And unfortunately, I've found that one of the things that's been lacking over the last few years in council has been that long-term strategy. We're trying to put a lot of this long-term strategy in place and not make ad hoc decisions. So some of these problems that need to be fixed aren't going to be fixed overnight, but it's great to hear feedback from the community to make sure we get those things right.
Well, Matthew, of course, if the roads are deteriorating as badly as what has been said, that you can always close the roads.
We'd have to close too many roads, Tony, if we base it on that.
You've been doing a bit of that lately. Okay. All right, Matthew. Well, thanks very much for taking your time to talk to Binjang 91.5. It's always important for our community to understand how our council and what our council is doing for the community.
Thanks, Tony. I appreciate your time.
It's a pleasure. And you've been listening to Matthew Dickerson, the Mayor of Dubbo Regional Council on Binjang.